Don't forget to subscribe. Afterwards, the wisest and most spiritual books from the greatest authors await you every day. And now buckle up, sit back and we'll begin. Hazrat Inayat Khan. The Alchemy of Happiness. Life, an opportunity. When we look at the world today and at the condition it is in, we begin to wonder if we understand any better than those who lived before us the idea that life is an opportunity. In spite of our present stage of evolution and the scientific advancement of the world, the war which humanity went through not long ago shows that never in the history of the world was such a great catastrophe caused by mankind. It seems as though the whole evolution of humanity had been intended to prepare and to create such means of destruction that the greater part of humanity has been ruined by it. And when we think of the distrust that exists today among nations and how one nation has allowed another nation to be ruined, we begin to feel that we understand the idea much less than those who lived before us that life is an opportunity. Regarding education, year by year the study in the schools and colleges is becoming more difficult. To pass their examinations, the students have to work so hard that it seems that by the time they have got a degree their nerves and finer forces are shattered, and that they are then unable to make full use of their qualifications. When we look at the political world we see the same. Each political party is striving for its own welfare, just as each individual is trying to get the better of another, and nations follow the same principle. Domestic life seems to be declining every day. Life is becoming more and more a hotel life. Very few in the world today experience and enjoy home life, or are even capable of appreciating it, for they do not know it. Those who lived before us were much happier, for they knew the simplicity and affection of home life and the joy and the pleasure of a home. The pleasures today are not like the enjoyments of the more intelligent and wise in ancient times. They used to enjoy poetry and higher music. Today jazz has become more popular. It is the same with all the other entertainments. When we go to the theater we find the plays more and more limited in scope. There is no depth, no height, no ideal. They show life as it really is, but that does not inspire or uplift mankind. What is needed is to show life better than it is so that man may follow that example. Besides the tendency of the writer, of the poet, of the artist, of the musician, is now to appeal to the most ordinary person, to the man of the lowest evolution, the man in the street. If everything that should educate man, theater, books, poetry, and art, pull him down to his lowest stage of evolution, it means going downward instead of upward. When a person writes good music or poetry with more lofty themes, there is no market for it. Whenever a person brings something higher he is told that it is not wanted. It seems that education, higher ideals, everything, is becoming commercialized, and by being commercialized it is lowered. And at the same time, if we stand in the midst of the crowd and look at the people hurrying by, we would think that never before have people tried so hard to make the best of life's opportunity. But the opportunity of life should be considered from a different point of view. The wiser we become, the more our outlook changes. There are 4 different stages in life: childhood, youth, middle age, and advanced age, and each of these 4 stages shows a great opportunity. For instance, in childhood the consciousness is in paradise. The child living in the same world of woe, treachery, and wickedness as the grown-up is happy because it is not yet awakened to the other aspect of life. It only knows the better side of it, the beauty of life. And therefore that same world is the Garden of Eden for the child till it grows and is exiled from the garden. Before that it enjoys paradise on earth. It is unaware of the wickedness and the ugliness of human nature. It still maintains in itself the heavenly air and angelic innocence, and the tendency to appreciate all beauty, and to love every being. As it grows it begins to lose that tendency. Nevertheless the child shows by its words and actions, and by every tendency, the angelic essence in its soul. This is the opportunity for every child to experience kingliness in life, and this opportunity is taken away by parents who send the child to school too early and burden it with study. We need not be anxious to prepare the child for its studies so that it will be able to answer in school. That kingliness that God has given to it, that joy and beauty for which it is born and which it longs to have, are thus taken away from it. This period of its life should be made free of anxiety and worry. The parents burden the child with studies, but after all, what do these studies lead to? The child's strength and intelligence are only lessened when it is burdened with unnecessary studies before the mind is developed, and this tendency is increasing more and more. People also want to teach a child concentration, but they have forgotten that a child is born with concentration. It is the grown-up whose concentration is weak. Every soul is born with concentration. It loses this faculty as it grows up. Once I was traveling in England and someone invited me to see a school where concentration was taught. They brought before me 10 or 15 children, and each child was asked to look at a blank curtain and say what was there. One child looked and said, "A lily." Another child said, "A rose." The teacher asked a third child to tell her what was there. The child answered, "I don't see anything." I thought, that is much better, at any rate he says what he sees. And so the teacher asked 10 or 12 children questions about what they saw. It was a lesson in hypocrisy, in exciting the imagination. It could never help a child, for the child's concentration is already there. If the child is kept a child, that is enough. We want to make the child into a grown-up person, but it is only happy when left to run about or to be cheerful. The child should not have this burden. We have made it for ourselves. It is not born with us. If life were not so complex, there would have been no need of war and of such difficulties as we have today. Because we have spoiled ourselves, we want more and more, and yet we make it so difficult to get what we want that in the end we cannot get it at all. And at the same time, by wanting more than is necessary, we make life miserable, and the life of others also. The amount of study with which a youth is loaded is the greatest wrong done to him today. But the culture of the youth seems to have disappeared, and inspiration is lacking. We have not realized what is necessary for young people. They are not given the inspiration of lofty ideals, nor those impressions which make them do great things. Today there seems to be a kind of uniformity in all youths. Youth has no admiration for a hero. No stimulus is given to youth to become a wonderful or an inspired person, a great poet or musician. Because of this uniform education, the child does not get the nourishment for its soul, which it needs to become that for which it was born. Besides, youth is an opportunity during which time a beautiful manner, a high aspiration, and lofty ideals can be taught. And it is youth which has the enthusiasm to take everything that comes, assimilate it and express it in return. But when the time of a youth is spent only in working hard all day long and trying to pass examinations, and little time is left for recreation or for other things that does not suffice for his life's purpose. Those who understand these ideas realize that youth is the greatest opportunity that comes in life. It never comes again. Life's springtime never returns, it comes only once, and when that opportunity is taken away and the youth has not been inspired as he should be, it is just like keeping a plant without watering it. For that is the very time it should be watered, that is the time for it to be reared, and that time should not be neglected. There are thousands and millions of young people in the colleges who have had no good manners taught to them, and no inspiration given to them. When they are grown up, they can show that they have passed examinations, that they have gained a lot of knowledge, yet the knowledge which enables the soul to develop has been neglected during their youth, during the time when the mind is receptive, and when the child, with all its enthusiasm and capacity for concentration, can grasp everything that is good and beautiful. The inspiration of the musicians and poets who have done great work in the world was created during their youth. Either they saw an example, a living example which impressed them, or they were told, or they studied something that was just like sowing the seed in their heart. For youth is the only time which destines the child to become great in life, and if this time is past, it will never come again. Whether a person wants to be a businessman or a politician, a professional man, a scientist or a musician, it is in youth that he should start, and that he should be inspired with that ideal. At that time the ground is fertile. But when that time is gone, the chance does not easily come again. Besides the training for various professions and occupations, there remains another capacity which is neglected in youth: the cultivation of the heart quality. Today there is hardly one person in 100 whose heart quality has been cultivated. Although instinctively the heart quality is always there, every effort is made to blunt it. What is meant by the heart quality? There is intuition, there is inspiration, and there is revelation. All these come from the culture of the heart, from the heart quality. A person may be most cultivated, may have studied much, and yet may not be intuitive. A person may learn all the techniques of music and poetry without having the heart quality. Heart quality is something which must be developed within oneself, and when no attention is given at the time of youth to developing that particular quality, what happens when a person is grown up? He will be selfish, proud, mannerless, and not ready to sacrifice. He believes that these characteristics guard his interest best, and one calls such a person a man of common sense or a practical man. But if everybody were like that, what could one expect of life except constant conflict as there is today? Religion, or the devotional side of man's nature, is also dying out for the reason that the heart quality is lacking. Even if people go to church or to another place of worship, their piety is intellectual. People can only enjoy something intellectual. When there is a mathematical explanation of something, it is wonderful, but when it comes to feeling blessed and uplifted, to feeling the raising of the consciousness towards the higher spheres, that they cannot experience for they live in their intellect. There are two principal experiences of life. One experience is called sensation and the other exaltation. What is generally known and experienced by the average man today is what is called sensation. All the beauty that one sees, of line or color, all that one sees with the eyes or that one tastes and touches. It is living in sensation that makes man material, and after some time he becomes ignorant of the spirit. Exaltation, which is a greater bliss, a higher pleasure, and which makes man independent of the outer life for his happiness, does not seem to be known by the majority. What is exaltation? The soul can go through 4 different experiences which are all in reality the longing of the soul. Mistakenly, man does not seek those 4 experiences, but instead he experiences something else. For instance, it is a constant yearning of the soul to experience happiness, and instead of that it becomes connected with what one calls pleasure, but pleasure belongs to sensation and happiness to exaltation. Pleasure is only the suggestion, happiness is reality. After that comes knowledge. Every soul yearns for knowledge, that knowledge which will give exaltation. But the soul cannot be satisfied by the knowledge one gathers from books, by learning, or by the study of outside things. For instance, the knowledge of science, the knowledge of art, are outside knowledge. They give one a kind of strength, a kind of satisfaction, but this does not last. It is another knowledge that the soul is really seeking. The soul cannot be satisfied unless it finds that knowledge, but that knowledge does not come by learning names and forms. On the contrary, it comes from unlearning. Do not be surprised, therefore, if you read in some books of the East that Mahatmas went into the mountains and sat there for many years. I do not say that we should follow their example, but we can appreciate what they have brought from there. They went there to explore life, that aspect of life which is unseen and remains unexplored. They sat there for years in meditation. They lived on leaves and fruits, on what they could find in the forest. They contemplated. What they have thus gathered is not a knowledge learned from this world, but a greater knowledge which can be learned from within. One can see pictures of Buddha, with closed eyes, sitting cross-legged. What does that symbol convey to us? That there is a knowledge that can be learnt by closing not only the eyes, but also the mind from the outside world. Closing the eyes does not make the concentration any greater. Most people go as far as closing the eyes, and no further, but if the eyes are closed and the mind is pondering over things, that is not concentration. Those who can concentrate can do it without having to close the eyes. I once saw, when traveling in the East, a person working in a telegraph office, and however busy he was, his concentration continued. I said, "It is very wonderful that with all this work you can go on concentrating." He smiled and said, "That is the way of concentration." The third thing one experiences in life and for which the soul yearns is happiness. That can be gained also by getting in touch within oneself. And the fourth thing is peace. It cannot be gained by outer means, by outer comfort and rest alone. It can only be gained when the mind is at rest. After youth comes the stage of middle age. Middle age is the time when one has gathered knowledge, when one has experienced life, when one has gone through joy and sorrow, when one has learnt lessons from one's profession, from one's occupation, from one's home, from every side of life. It is the opportunity to make the best use of what one has gathered by experience. But what generally happens is what Sati, the Persian poet, says, "O myself, you have come to middle age, and yet you are no better than a child." If a person has not learned by that time all he ought to learn, he has indeed lost life's opportunity. Because it is that age during which he earns not only money, but experience and knowledge, and the more he has learned, the richer he is at that time, and the better he knows how to make use of what powers he has, the more successful and fruitful he becomes. Besides, that is the age when one begins to know life's obligations, and if one does not know them even then, one has not learned anything. To know one's obligation towards those who look up to one, who surround one, who expect some help, some advice, some service from one, that is the time when one must be conscious of these things. It is the beautiful age when the tree comes to full maturity, when it begins to give fruit to the world. Not only is this the time for the singer when his voice is in full blossom, not only is this the time for the artist or the thinker when he can express himself fully, but for every person that age is the promise of the ripened mind expressing itself to the best advantage, and if that opportunity is not taken, then man has missed a great deal in life. Advanced age too has its own blessings. People do not appreciate the blessings of every period of life, therefore they appreciate one and dislike another. In the East, especially in India, great respect is given to age, and it would be good if that ideal were more widespread. Old age is the time when man is the record of his whole life, whether he has been sympathetic, kind, wise, foolish, or whatever he has been, whatever he has done. Advanced age brings the record of it. One can read it in his face, in his features, in his atmosphere. He has a greater opportunity to inspire, to bless, and to serve those who want his service or who want to be directed. He can show them a better way of looking at life. But when man does not realize his opportunities, he will act like a child in middle age, while in childhood he was given the work of an old person, and in youth he was burdened like someone of middle age. If we only understood that every moment in life, every day, every month, and every year, has its particular blessing, if we only knew life's opportunity. But the greatest opportunity that one can realize in life is to accomplish that purpose for which man was sent on earth. And if he has lost that opportunity, then whatever he may have accomplished in the world, whether he has gathered wealth, possesses much property, or has made a great name for himself, he will not be satisfied. Once man's eyes are opened and he begins to look at the world, he will find there is a greater opportunity than he had ever thought before. Man is as poor as he is, as limited as he is, as troubled as he is, yet there is nothing in this world which could not be accomplished by man, if he only knew what thought can do. It is ignorance which keeps him from what he ought to accomplish. Man should know how to operate his thought, how to accomplish certain things, how to focus his mind on the object that should be accomplished. If he does not know, then he has not made use of his mind, but has lived like a machine. If man knew the power of feeling, and realized that the power of feeling can reach anywhere and penetrate anything, he could achieve whatever he might wish. There is a Persian story of Shirin and Farhad. Once Shirin, the girl whom Farhad admired, in order to test his love said, "Farhad, do you love me? If you love me, you will have to make a way through the mountains." Farhad said, "Yes, I was waiting for that test." He went to the mountains full of the feeling of love he had for her. Every time he broke the rock with his hammer, he said the name of Shirin, and the strength of his hammer became 1,000 times greater because it was joined by the feeling of his heart. Today man has forgotten the great power there is in feeling. It can break rocks. There is nothing that cannot be accomplished by the power of feeling. But generally there is no feeling. Feeling has become drowned, it no longer exists. To realize the power of feeling and to express it is a great opportunity which life offers, but a still greater opportunity of life is to free oneself from the captivity of limitations. Every man is a captive in some form or other, His life is limited in some form or other, but one could get above this limitation by realizing the latent power and inspiration of the soul. Kabir, the great poet of India, says, "Life is a field and you are born to cultivate it. And if you know how to cultivate this field, you can produce anything you like. All the need of your life can be produced in this field. All that your soul yearns after and all you need is to be got from the field, if you know how to cultivate it and how to reap the fruit." But if this opportunity is only studied in order to make the best of life by taking all that one can take, and by being more comfortable, that is not satisfying. We must enrich ourselves with thought, with that happiness which is spiritual happiness, with that peace which belongs to our soul, with that liberty, that freedom, for which our soul longs, and attain to that higher knowledge which breaks all the fetters of life and raises our consciousness to look at life from a different point of view. Once a person has realized this opportunity, he has fulfilled the purpose of life. Our life's experience. Consciously or unconsciously, we call to us that element which makes us what we are. What we experience in life, therefore, has either come from what we have already called to us in the past, or from what we call at the present moment. It is very difficult for a person to hear something for the first time and accept it immediately. No person in this world is desirous of calling for something that he does not wish to have, so, as Emerson has said, think beforehand of what you want. The principle of the whole of creation is based on this. Even the fruits and flowers, the plants and trees, in order to be what they are, call for that element which makes them. If fragrance belonged to all flowers, then every flower would have fragrance, but it is only a certain flower which has fragrance. It is that flower which calls for it. Every flower has a different color. Why? Because each flower calls for it. Every seed or herb which possesses medical value shows that its peculiarity belongs to it, and it calls for it. The life of little insects will also show us proof of the same fact. Their green or blue or red color, and their beautiful or ugly form, are all based on and controlled by what they have called to themselves. Insects moving among beautiful flowers show beauty in their color, in their construction, for they live in beauty, and so they call for beauty. Insects living in the mud show a different quality again. Why? Because they call for it. The more we study science, be it natural science or chemistry, we shall find that each being and each object with a certain peculiarity shows that it is like that because it is called for that particular element. One might ask how, if it is true that the flowers and plants call for the element that makes their color, it happens that there is sometimes little difference in the colors of flowers and leaves, and that all roses have more or less the same scent. The answer is that the rose's past is behind it. And since the seed of the rose had conceived those properties which the rose shows, it is maintained as its heritage that fragrance and color. But at the same time it takes from the air and the sun that substance which makes it the perfect rose. In other words, there is perhaps in some garden another plant, a flower which is without fragrance. It has the same sun, it has the same air, it is in the same soil, but it is the rose which calls for the properties that make it a rose. Though that flower is in the same place, it does not call for them, it calls only for those properties which keep it as it is. And of people one may say symbolically that one creeps on this earth, another walks gently, a third runs, and a fourth flies. Yet they are all on the same earth and under the same sun. No quality can exist without being maintained by what it attracts every moment of the day. As our physical body depends upon physical sustenance for its existence, and as our mind depends on the sustenance of its own sphere, so each quality has its food, a food which it calls for and on which it lives. As the body would cease to exist if its sustenance were not given to it, so every quality, however great it may appear in a person, would cease to exist if there were no sustenance within reach. If we observe keenly the life around us, we will find 1,000 proofs of this. How many are there with an inclination to sing, with a desire to do some good, who themselves cannot find their qualities, or whose qualities vanish once they are starved of that food on which they live? Man, who is so to speak the finished product of creation, shows this doctrine in its fullness. His success, his failure, his sorrow, his joy, all depend upon what he calls, and what he has called to himself. Many will say, but is it not the case that he is experiencing that which he was meant to experience? That is the idealistic point of view, and a good point of view to take. It is also consoling. Yet when we come to the study of metaphysics, we shall find that the secret behind creation is what the Hindus call the dream of Brahma. Since each being represents Brahma, the creator, so each being in his sphere is a creator of his own life. It is ignorance of this fact which keeps man back from his progress towards perfection, and it is knowledge of this which alone can be called divine knowledge. For if ever anyone attained to a higher realization, it was by this knowledge. There is another side to this question to be considered. One may say that there are many undesirable things which one should never have desired, but one did not desire them as one sees them now. It was, as one saw them before, in another form, that one desired them. Very often happiness shows itself in the guise of unhappiness. Very often pain shows itself in the guise of pleasure. He who does not seek after pain will seek after pleasure, but he does not know that perhaps behind that pleasure the pain was hiding. A seeker after success may not see failure hiding behind it, and at that time the very seeking for success would lead him to failure. For that success was only a success in appearance, in reality it was a failure. Life is a comedy, and the more you look at it, the more you can smile at it. Smile not at other people but at yourself. Life is always different from what one thinks it to be, and this applies to pain, pleasure, happiness, success, and failure, everything. People often wonder why some souls are born in miserable circumstances and others are not. There is a saying in the Quran which even sages have sometimes misinterpreted. The creation has come out of the darkness. The soul does not always come to earth with its eyes open. It generally comes with closed eyes, as is shown by the infant which does not open its eyes immediately. But to compare one condition with another, one needs to be familiar with those conditions, and that time comes after being born. If one considered this question more deeply, one would come to a very great realization of the secret of life, and especially of the secret of good and bad fortune. Then one would realize that it is not always by design, that a soul is so limited that it cannot get out of a certain condition, but that every soul makes for itself a condition, even after coming to the earth. There are many who live in misery, in bad conditions, because they know no better. If they had known better, they could have managed to better themselves. This rule applies to many people in life. Most of the reasons for their misery are to be found in their own ignorance. If they knew how to write, how to get out of their misery, there would be many ways of doing so. But whatever be the condition of a person, it is never unfair, for his gains will always equal his losses and his losses, his gains. Only, we do not always see what is the real value of every loss and gain, and outward conditions count little in reality. Thus one person has difficulties and troubles and another is at peace. But it all evens up. Even when with great difficulty one finds a happy man, it is not easy to prove that he is happy. Happiness consists of one thing only: the realization of God, and to realize God means to lose oneself. No doubt, as in the light of the sun the dim candle light fades, so in the happiness of God consciousness, the longing for minor pleasures falls away. At the same time, finding God does not mean looking for unhappiness and renouncing all the pleasures of life. Life becomes even more pleasant the more one progresses in the realization of God. All conditions are illusory, and in the end the sum total of every person's difficulties is the same, that is to say, the sum total is the horizon, but if we have to point out where the horizon is, we cannot. As we go towards the horizon, however, we find the distinction between cause and effect becoming paler and paler, and everything balances more and more in our life. The further we go, the closer we come to that equilibrium which is expressed by the symbol of the serpent with its tail in its mouth. There is neither tail nor mouth. Mouth and tail are only there as long as the serpent is straight. They are no longer there when the serpent has curled itself up and put its tail in its mouth. There was once a man who hated his neighbors and fought and quarreled with them. This bred much ill will, until in the end the heart of one person melted, and he said, "What are we quarreling about? It is just a misunderstanding about a single word I said." And their whole world of hatred crumbled from that moment, and they became friends. There comes a time when there is a summing up of the situation or event. That is the end of it, and the further we go the more it disappears. All our disputes, high or low, will pale and fade away, and when no color is left in them, then that white light comes which is the light of God. It is that attainment which was called by Buddha nirvana. To our ordinary senses colors appear as a reality, but in the realism of truth they fade away, they have no existence. There are, however, blessed souls who are really satisfied and whose hunger is stilled by seeing another person eating, or who are happy seeing another person adorned with beautiful clothes. It might seem to us a great renunciation or self-denial, but they have been given a cross to bear and have risen above it. Sacrifice gives no pain, it only gives pleasure. The spark of this nirvana is in every soul. I once said to a child, "Wouldn't you rather give your toy away to that other poor child?" It had just received the toy and had not even played with it. I added, "You should not give your toy away if you wouldn't be really glad to see that other child playing with it." It was just like watching a match bursting into flame. That child consented at once and gave its toy, and you should have seen its face, it was beaming with happiness. Therefore this nirvana need not be learned by study, it is in us. It is a star in us whose brilliance consumes all the impurities of life, and it turns them all into purity, which is the divine light. If there were no pain, one would not have the experience of joy. It is pain which helps one to experience joy. Everything is distinguished by its opposite, and the one who feels pain deeply is more capable of expressing joy. If there were no pain, life would be most uninteresting, for it is by pain that penetration takes place, and the sensation after pain is a deeper joy. Without pain, the great musicians, athletes, discoverers, and thinkers would not have reached the stage they have arrived at in the world. If they had always experienced joy, they would not have touched the depths of life. For what is pain? Pain in the true sense of the word is the deepest joy. If we have imagination, we can enjoy tragedy more than comedy. Comedy is for children, and tragedy is for grown-ups. It is by pain alone that somebody becomes what is called an old soul, one who may be young in age, but whose thoughts are deep. If sorrow and sadness have no reality, why then did Christ say, "My soul is exceeding sorrowful"? We must distinguish between the human side of the Master's life and the divine side. If the human side were not human, then what would be human? Why does God send his message to humanity by a man and not by angels? Because only a human being knows human beings. He knows them from having experienced human limitation. That he felt sadness is the most beautiful side of the Master's life. If he had not, how could he have sympathized with those who are sorrowful? If we were all born perfect, there would be no purpose in human life. The purpose of life is that we grow towards perfection. From the greatest limitation we grow towards perfection. Its beauty is in acquiring wisdom, in living at the cost of all our failures, our mistakes. It is all worthwhile, and it all accomplishes the purpose of our coming to the earth. Is it perhaps, one might ask, God's way of making us immune to sorrow when he sends us troubles and difficulties? Everything is the way of God. When he sends troubles and sorrows, and when he sends joy and pleasure. If we would see in everything the hand of God, we would be thankful for both. Some people are very much impressed by the doctrine of karma, and in a way it is a virtue to take everything patiently and call it karma, but that is not sufficient. We should realize that happiness is our birthright. God does not rejoice in our sorrow, God is not pleased by our pain, and therefore we must do everything in our power to escape from illness and other difficulties, instead of lying patiently waiting, as if under a rock, because it is our karma. On the other hand, it is good to look for the cause of our sorrows in our own thoughts and actions. Sometimes it is not only the conditions of life which cause us sorrow, but we allow them to create sorrow for us. A part of sorrow comes from life, and a part we make ourselves. Also, a part of joy comes from life, and a part we make ourselves. If one helps life to give one a little joy, it will do so. If one does not allow it, life becomes helpless. Out of 100 things in everyday life that we take too seriously, we should perhaps take only one seriously and realize that the other 99 matter little. To some extent there must be attachment and illusion, although as little as possible. For if there were no illusion and attachment, it would be as if it were day all the time and never night. Also in illusion and attachment there is a motive power, and by that motive power a purpose of life is accomplished. And if there were no illusion and attachment, the soul would not be able to hold the body, even to a small extent, because this it can only do through attachment. Many people who are very ill, sometimes for years and years, continue to be ill without dying. The reason is the attachment of the soul to the body. But, we may ask, as the world that we see has no reality, as it is an illusion, why do we see that illusion? What is the cause of that illusion which torments us? One uses the word illusion conventionally, but its true meaning is not realized until the reality of life is understood, until the innermost or eternal life is realized. It is when we understand this that everything seems an illusion. Illusion is something which seems to exist, but yet does not exist in any form. The nature of all things which seem to exist and do not last is like this. Their existence is transitory, and to a certain extent the effect produced by them upon our soul is intoxication. We are so hypnotized by all we see that momentarily we forget it is not lasting. Therefore, the way of the mystic is to close his eyes and also his heart to that which is not lasting, in order to have a chance of finding out that there is a life which is not transitory. He practices every kind of meditation and concentration to free his mind of this intoxication which is continually coming over him. Man spends all his efforts to gain this intoxication, and in the end there is only disappointment. We cannot claim that there is no joy and no pain. In saying so, we defeat our own argument. One can say there is nothing but illusion, but putting this idea into words weakens it for those who do not look at it in the same way. It is realization which is needed, not the claim. Real virtue is learnt by the study of reality, then it comes by itself. When a person becomes conscious of reality, the light of reality shines before him, the lamp of Aladdin, the guiding light. There are two ways of calling, of attracting, that which makes up oneself. One way is by calling that which is outside of one's life, in order to make one's life complete, be it wealth, power, position, or anything else. But there is another way of calling, and that is to call the very self. By calling one's real self, one naturally harmonizes one's spirit, and it may become so harmonized that both with friend and foe, one would feel harmony. Once we have communicated with ourself, once we have called ourself, our real self, we become naturally harmonized with pain and pleasure, and we become contented with success and failure. For in spite of all the different experiences of our external life, there rises in the depth of our heart a harmony, a peace, and a power which keep us centralized. To avoid being wet in the rain, we cannot stop the rain. All that we can do is to have an umbrella which is waterproof. By developing ourselves materially or spiritually, we cannot stop the natural consequences of life. When we are in the midst of the world, we are exposed to all the agreeable and disagreeable experiences which life gives us. If there is a way of making life easy for ourselves, it is only by harmonizing within ourselves, so that we can harmonize with all the different conditions and experiences of life. If we complain, there is no end to our complaints. In order to have no complaints, we must not complain. But we should be conscious of the fact that all that we experience is called, is attracted by us, and that all we shall experience will be called by us also. Thus, at each step in our life we must be wise, in order to recognize, among all the things that we desire, those that we should call to ourselves and those that we should not. The past has passed, it is no use mourning over it. It is just as well to forget the past, except for beautiful impressions and good memories. It is the present for which we are responsible, for it is the present which will be our future. The most essential thing, therefore, is to harmonize in such a way that by centralizing our thought within ourselves, by finding our real self, the future may become harmonized. There is a prayer in the East. We thank Thee, God, for all we have experienced. The only thing we ask is make our end the best experience of all. Communicating with life. From the point of view of the mystic, life in all its aspects is communicative, if one only knows the secret of communicating with life. As long as one is ignorant of this secret, one is deaf, though one has ears, and blind, though one has eyes. There are stories of sages and saints who spoke with trees and plants and rocks, with mountains and with seas. People take these to be legends, but it is as true as anything else in this world of variety. It is not only true of the past, but it can always be possible if one knows how to communicate with life. In the lower creation, we recognize a faculty which we call instinct. The tendency that makes the bird fly and the fish swim without learning. This instinct also appears as intuition among the lower creation. Many scientists today say that animals have no mind, but in reality all creatures have a mind, even plants and trees. Those who live close to nature, those whose life work is agriculture, those who live in the solitude among animals, know the fact that animals often give a warning of illness or of death, of a storm or a flood. They have intuition. The mechanism of man's body and mind is finer still. Man is capable of a greater intuition, and yet it seems that animals perceive some things sooner than man. The reason is that man is so absorbed in his outer life, in his object in life, that it is very difficult for him to believe in intuition, and therefore his intuitive faculty becomes blunted, and he proves to be less intuitive than the lower creation. Those living close to nature in the solitude, or peasants living in the country, have greater intuition than intellectual people who live in the midst of worldly life. This shows that the life we live today in large towns is an unnatural life, lived in an artificial atmosphere, eating artificial food, adopting artificial ways. So one loses that heavenly quality, the divine heritage of man which is shown in the intuitive qualities. Fine persons seem to have more intuition than gross ones. Women seem to have greater intuition than men. The reason is that woman is by nature responsive. It is the receptivity of her more mature being that makes her more intuitive. Sometimes man reasons and argues, but woman says, "Yes, but I feel it is to be this or that," and her feeling proves to be right, although she cannot give a reason for it. In every person there exists to a greater or lesser degree a faculty of perceiving impressions, and that is the first step towards intuition. The finer the person, the greater his perception. But everyone at times feels, as an impression, the conditions of a place, the character of the people he meets, their tendencies, their motives, their desire, their grade of evolution. When this happens and one is asked why one feels like this, one cannot always give an explanation. One may say it is from the person's face, or from the atmosphere, or from what he has said. But in reality it is a feeling which is beyond description. A fine, sensitive, intelligent person always gets an impression on seeing someone. The next stage is intuition. By intuition one receives warning of a coming danger, the promise of success, or the premonition of failure. If any change is to take place in life one feels it. But very often by not having self-confidence one loses that intuitive faculty. One fears that one's intuition is wrong, and in this way one loses self-confidence. One often thinks that perhaps one's intuition is not right. By following one's intuition one will fail, and so one takes another course. That is the way of reasoning, of logic, but naturally one's intuition becomes blunted after some time. If one does not make use of this faculty it disappears, and someone who is capable of perceiving intuitively then loses that faculty. Another wonderful thing about intuition is that one is blessed with intuition according to one's sincerity. If a person is earnest, sincere, sympathetic, kind, he will be blessed with intuition. But if these qualities are lacking, intuition will be lacking too. Also, those who have no intuition have difficulty in attaining to the spiritual ideal, for spiritual belief does not come from outer experience, it does not come by reason and logic, it is a belief that springs from within in the form of intuition. And if the intuitive faculty is not developed, that person's belief is not strong. Someone who lacks intuition lacks belief too, and if he has a belief, that belief will not be strong enough, for it is not built on a sound foundation. The next step along the path of intuition is inspiration. Poets, writers, musicians, thinkers, philosophers are able to make use of this faculty. Others have it, but they do not know how to use it. In art, poetry, or music, one can create in a few moments through inspiration that which one could not otherwise create in 10 years. It is a natural flow, one has no difficulty in working it out. What is inspired comes already arranged beforehand, and there is very little to be done by the brain and by the mind. Besides, everything that comes through inspiration is living and is most beautiful, most harmonious, compared with the art or poetry or music that is the outcome of the brain. Music of the great musicians of the past, such as Wagner or Beethoven, is still living. And no matter how often one hears it, one always thirsts for it. Modern music has not that appeal. It is the same thing with ancient art. There is something living in that art, and today with all the progress made in art, that something is missing. It is the same with poetry. In Persia there were great poets such as Hafiz, Rumi, and Saadi, whose works are still studied today and highly esteemed by millions of people in the East. They consider that without these works, there would be no human culture. Their work was the foundation of human culture in the East. Many later poets have tried to produce the same kind of works, but they have not yet succeeded. Even after many centuries, it seems that the inspiration is lost. Inspiration, whenever it comes, is living and life-giving, and it will always last, and one will never get tired of it. What is the theory of inspiration? Where does one find it? Where does it come from? There is one treasure house where all knowledge collected, experienced, learned, and discovered by human beings is stored, and that treasure house is the divine mind, a mind with which all minds are linked. There is no experience we go through that does not remain or that is not recorded in that treasure house. Every good or bad experience we have, every new thing we learn, every discovery we make, is all stored in that treasure house. But one might ask, how does one find in it what one wants? If we have a large store, perhaps hundreds and thousands of things, it is difficult to find anything we want at a moment's notice. The power of the mind, the willpower, is such that if one has enough of it, one can find anything one wants to find. It is related that someone with great willpower wanted to buy a certain piece of furniture. In the first street he went to after leaving his house, he saw exhibited in the showroom the very piece of furniture he desired. He was guided towards it. What one really wants is attracted by one, and one is attracted by what one wants. It is the same with the poet, the musician, the thinker. When he is deeply interested in what he is doing, then he has only to wish, and by the automatic action of the desire his wish becomes a light. This light is thrown on the divine star house, and it is projected on the object he wants. Such is the phenomenon of will and inspiration. That no sooner is an inspired person moved by the beauty and harmony of life and wishes to express his soul, than the light of his soul shines on that particular object or on that particular knowledge. It comes instantly to his mind, expressing itself outwardly through his mind. All that is brought from within in this way is perfect, harmonious, beautiful, and has a wonderful effect. In ancient times, the Shah of Persia expressed a desire to have a history of Persia written. But he was told that the records were lost and that it would be very difficult to trace the accounts of the kings who had lived in the past. However, a poet of that time, named Ferdowsi, said, "I will write the history of Persia." He was a truly inspired poet. People were amazed. They wondered how he could do it. But Ferdowsi sent his soul, so to speak, into the past, and his soul became a receptacle of the knowledge of the past, which he expressed in the form of poetry. His book is called the Shahnameh of Persia. Many people think that science is based upon the knowledge of facts proved by reason and logic, and very few know that at the beginning there was always intuition. All scientific discoveries spring from intuition. After that, reason has its place, and logic helps. The scientists analyze and make their discoveries intelligible to others, but in the beginning these come from intuition. If the great inventors of America such as Edison and others had been great mechanics, only it would not have been sufficient. Behind this, however, there was intuition. Today there is a tendency not to admit that side of life. People believe it is not solid enough to rely upon intuition or inspiration. Once in Paris, I was surprised at hearing a famous writer say, "Is there such a thing as inspiration?" I thought, here is a great writer who has made a name for himself, and yet he does not know if there is such a thing as inspiration. By continual material strife, and by continual ignoring of the God Spirit, people have become so materialistic that they do not think that such a thing as inspiration exists. This man had become famous without believing in inspiration, and that was all he wanted. But when I learned more about the work of this writer, I found that his works were extremely superficial. There was no depth to them and no height, and that is the kind that is successful these days. When one goes to see modern plays, one finds the same thing. There is hardly a play with depth. And if one asks why it is so, the answer is, in order to please the man in the street. That means, we must keep everybody back in order to please the man in the street. The next step after inspiration is vision. It is more than inspiration. One need not see a vision only in a dream, one can also have a vision when awake. There is nothing to be frightened of in this. It is only clearness of the inner sight. Knowledge comes in a flash and a problem is solved. A philosophical problem or a certain hidden law of life or nature has become manifest in a very clear form. Or one has got in touch with something or with someone at an unimaginable distance. Many people have misunderstood the real meaning of vision and have often pretended to be visionary, but the development of the true inner vision indicates great progress of the soul. When one goes still further on the path of intuition, one comes to what is called revelation, which means that everything and every being reveals to one its secret. Such a one feels that every leaf has a tongue to tell its legend. He finds that every soul is a living book which reads its own story aloud. He finds that every condition of life is turned inside out before him the moment he looks at it. He feels that he is at home on earth and in heaven, and that both the here and the hereafter become manifest to his soul. How does it happen that one experiences and perceives intuition or inspiration, and that one sees visions and gets revelations? There is the story of the apostles who instantly knew many languages. This does not mean that they knew French or English, German or Spanish. It means that they knew the language of every soul, that every soul began to speak to them, that they began to communicate with every person. The meaning of revelation is the understanding of the language of the soul. Every soul is always speaking if one can only hear it. It is not always what one hears in the noise of the world or the voice of man, but even the silent trees and the still mountains speak to us when we are able to hear them. It is a language of vibrations, an imperceptible language, and yet a fine mind can grasp it. The only explanation of it is that it is a music. For a musician, music is a language that tells him something. The high and the low note, the flat and the sharp, are all expressive and all tell him something. It all has a meaning. A person who is not a student of music does not know that language. He will enjoy music, but he does not know the language. Then there is the language of life, for life too is music. Each person represents a note in that music, and that makes the symphony of life. One person is in tune, the other person is out of tune. One person is sounding the right note, the other a false one. In this way every person makes or disturbs the music. Revelation comes from the understanding of this music. You cannot learn it, you cannot teach it, but you can tune your heart to that pitch where it begins to live, and to enjoy the music of life. In this way revelation is perceived. It happens when the heart has become awake and living, so that it can perceive the vibrations coming from every soul, and every condition conveys a certain meaning to it. The great prophets and teachers who have brought religion to humanity, who have inspired humanity with a higher ideal, who have guided mankind towards spiritual attainment, they were the souls who had revelations. And what they gave to the world was their interpretation of those revelations which came from the music of life. But no sooner does a composer put his music on paper than much of it is lost, and when the prophet gives his teachings in the form of words, much is lost too. There are some who consider their belief as something sacred and are satisfied with that, but there are others who want to know the spirit of it. The words that have come down to us are only the interpretations of the revelations the prophets received. If all the people in the world knew the spirit of religion, then there would not be so many different religions and creeds. They would all keep to that one truth. That there are so many creeds, so many religions, is because they do not understand religion. If one understood it, then there would only be one religion, interpreted differently by the different teachers of humanity. But whether people understood more or less, they have all benefited by the prophet's coming to this earth, though no doubt his message could be better fulfilled if it were understood by more people, and if those who understood it could understand it better. The intoxication of life. There are many things in life which are intoxicating, but if we considered the nature of life, we would realize that there is nothing more intoxicating than our life itself. We can see the truth of this idea when we think of what we were yesterday and compare it with our condition today. Our unhappiness or happiness, our riches or poverty of yesterday are like a dream to us. It is only today's condition that counts. This life of continual rise and fall and of continual changes is like running water, and man identifies himself with this running water, although in reality he does not know what he is. For instance, if a man goes from poverty to riches and then those riches are taken away from him, He laments, and he laments because he does not remember that before having those riches he was poor, and that from that poverty he came to riches. If one considers what one's fancies through life have been, one will find that at every stage of development, one had a particular fancy. Sometimes one longed for certain things, and at other times one did not care for them. If one can look as a spectator at one's own life, one will find that it was nothing but an intoxication. What at one time gives man great satisfaction and pride, at another time humiliates him. What a person enjoys at one time, troubles him at another time. What at one time he values greatly, at another time he does not value at all. If a man can observe his actions in everyday life, and if he has an awakened sense of justice and understanding, he will often find himself doing something which he had not intended to do, or saying something that he did not wish to say, or behaving in such a way that he asks himself, "Why was I such a fool?" Sometimes he allows himself to love someone, to admire someone. It may go on for days, for weeks, for months, even years. Although years may be very long, and then perhaps he feels that he was wrong, or something more attractive comes along. Then he is on another road and does not know where he is anymore, nor whom he loves. In the action and reaction of his life, a man sometimes does things on impulse, not considering what he is doing, and at other times he has, so to speak, a spell of goodness, and he goes on doing what he thinks is good. At other times a reaction sets in, and all his goodness is gone. Then in his business or profession he gets an impulse. He must do this, or he must do that, and he seems to be full of strength and courage. Sometimes he perseveres, and sometimes it lasts only a day or two, and then he forgets what he was doing and does something else. This shows that man in his life in the activity of the world is just like a piece of wood, lifted by the waves of the sea when they rise up, and cast down when they subside. That is why the Hindus have called the life of the world Bhavasagara, an ocean, an ever-rising ocean. And man is floating on this ocean of worldly activity, not knowing what he is doing, not knowing where he is going. What seems to him of importance is only the moment which he calls the present. The past is a dream, the future is in a mist, and the only thing clear to him is the present. The attachment and love and affection of man are not very different from the attachment of the birds and animals. There is a time when the sparrow looks after its young and brings grains in its beak and puts them into the beak of its young ones, and they anxiously await the coming of their mother. And this goes on until their wings are grown, and once the young ones have known the branches of the tree and they have flown in the forests under the protection of their mother, they never again remember that mother who was so kind to them. There are moments of emotion, there are impulses of love, of attachment, of affection, but there comes a time when these pass, they pale and fade away. And there comes a time when a person thinks that there is something else he desires and something else he would like to love. The more one thinks of man's life in the world, the more one comes to the understanding that it is not very different from the life of a child. The child takes a fancy to a doll, and then it gets tired of that doll and wants another toy. But at the moment when it takes a fancy to the doll or the toy, it thinks it the most valuable thing in the world, and then there comes a time when it throws away the doll and destroys the toy. And so it is with man. His scope is perhaps a little different, but his action is the same. All that man considers important in life, such as the collection of wealth, the possession of property, the attainment of fame, or the rising to a position he may think ideal, all these objects have only an intoxicating effect on him. And after attaining the object he is not satisfied. He thinks that there is perhaps something else he wants, that it was not this that he wanted. Whatever he wants he feels to be the most important of all, but after attaining it he no longer thinks it is important at all, he wants something else. In everything that pleases him and makes him happy, in his amusements, his theater, his moving pictures, golf, polo, or tennis, it seems that what amuses him is to be puzzled and not to know where he is going. It seems that he only desires to fill his time. And what man calls pleasure is what happens at the moment when he is intoxicated with the activity of life. Anything that covers his eyes from reality, anything that gives him a certain sensation of life, anything that he can indulge in, and that makes him conscious of some activity, that is what he calls pleasure. Man's nature is such that whatever he becomes accustomed to is his pleasure, be it eating, drinking, or any activity. If he becomes accustomed to what is bitter, bitterness gives him pleasure. If he becomes accustomed to what is sour, then sourness gives him pleasure. If he becomes accustomed to eat sweets, then he will like sweet things. Some men get into the habit of complaining about their life, and if they have nothing to complain about, then they look for something to complain of. Others want the sympathy of their fellow men and want to explain to them that they are badly treated. It is an intoxication. Then there is the person who has fallen into the habit of theft. He derives pleasure from it, and the habit becomes stronger and stronger, and when another source of income is offered to him he is not interested, he does not want it. In this way people become accustomed to certain things in life. These things become a pleasure, an intoxication. There are many who develop the habit of worrying about things. The least little thing worries them very much. They cherish whatever little sorrow they have. It is a plant they water and nourish. And so many, directly or indirectly, consciously or unconsciously, become accustomed to illness, an illness that is more an intoxication than a reality. And as long as a man holds the thought of that illness he sustains it, and the illness settles in his body, and no doctor can take it away. Then a man's environment and condition in life create for him an illusion and an intoxication, so that he no longer sees the condition of the people around him, the people of the city or country in which he lives. And the intoxication not only remains with him when he is awake, but it continues in his dreams, just as the drunkard too will dream of the things that have to do with his drunkenness. If he has joy or sorrow, if he has worries or pleasure, the same will be his condition in his dream, and day and night the dream continues to exist. With some the dream lasts the whole life, with others only a certain time. Man loves this intoxication as much as the drunkard loves the intoxication of wine. When a person is seeing something interesting in his dream, and somebody tries to wake him, he feels for a moment inclined to sleep on and finish that interesting dream, although he knows that it was a dream and that someone is waking him. This intoxication can be seen in all the different aspects of life. It manifests even in the religious, philosophical, and mystical aspects. Man seeks after subtlety and wishes to know something that he cannot understand. He is very pleased to be told something that his reason cannot understand. Give him the simple truth and he will not like it. When teachers like Jesus Christ came to earth and gave the message of truth in simple words, the people of the time said, "This is in our book, we know it already." But whenever there is an attempt to mystify people, telling them of fairies and ghosts and spirits, They are very pleased. They desire to understand what they cannot understand. What man has always called spiritual or religious truth has been the key to that ultimate truth which man cannot see because of his intoxication. And this truth nobody can give to another person. It is in every soul, for the human soul itself is this truth. All that can be given is the means by which the truth can be known. The religions in various forms have been methods by which the inspired souls taught man to know this truth and to be benefited by this truth which is in the soul of man. But instead of being benefited by a religion in this way, man has accepted only the external part of the religion and has fought with others, saying, "My religion is the only right one, your religion is false." Nevertheless, there have always existed some wise ones, like those of whom it is told in the Bible that they came from the east when Jesus Christ was born, to see the child. What does this mean? It means that at different times there have existed wise men whose life's mission it has been to keep themselves sober in spite of this intoxication all around them, and to help their fellow men to gain this soberness. Among those who were wise and remained sober, there have been some who had great inspiration as well as great power and control over themselves and over life within and without. These are the wise men who have been called saints, sages, prophets, or masters. But even when following or accepting these wise men, man, through his intoxication, has monopolized one of them as his prophet or teacher, and has fought with others. In this way he has shown his intoxication and drunkenness. And just as a drunken man will, without any thought, hit or hurt another person who happens to be different from him, who thinks or feels or acts differently, so for the most part the great people of the world who came to help humanity have been killed, crucified, hurt or tortured. But they have not complained about it. They have taken it as a natural consequence. They have understood that they were in a world of intoxication or drunkenness, and that it is natural that a drunken man should try to hurt or do harm. This has been the history of the world in whatever quarter the message of God has been given. In reality, the message comes from one source, and that is God. And under whatever name the wise gave that message, it was not their message, but the message of God. Those whose hearts had eyes to see and ears to hear have known and seen the same messenger, because they have received the message. And those whose hearts had no eyes or ears have taken the messenger to be important and not the message. But at whatever period that message came and in whatever form the message was given, it was always that one message, the message of wisdom. Every stimulus that one experiences through food and drink is really a small intoxication. But it is not only the food that one eats, the water that one drinks, and all that one sees and hears and touches that has an influence, an effect, on a man's being and intoxicates him. Even the air that he breathes from morning till evening is continually giving him a stimulus and an intoxication. If this is true, is there then one moment when a man is not intoxicated? He is always intoxicated, only sometimes more so than others. This is, however, not the only intoxication. A man's absorption in the affairs of his life also keeps him intoxicated, and besides the intoxication of his work and affairs in which his mind is absorbed, there is a third intoxication, and that is the attachment that a man has to himself, the sympathy he has with himself. It is this intoxication which makes him selfish, greedy, and very often unjust towards his fellow men. The effect of this intoxication is that a man is continually feeling, thinking, and acting with the idea in mind of what would be to his interest, what could bring him an advantage, and in this idea his whole life and all his time become fully involved. It is this intoxication that makes him say, "This one is my friend, and that one is my enemy. This one is my well-wisher, but that one is against me." And it is this intoxication that builds the ego, the false ego of man. Just as an intoxicated man does not really know what is profitable to him, so a selfish man in his selfishness never knows nor understands what is really to his advantage. In moments of soberness a man wonders, if this is intoxication, then what is reality? I would like to know what reality is. But to know reality not only the eyes and ears are necessary, but soberness too is needed to hear and see better. One might ask why all this should be called intoxication, if it seems to be the normal state of every person. It can be called a normal condition only insofar as it is indeed the condition of everyone, but intoxication remains intoxication, it is not satisfactory. There is an innate longing for a certain satisfaction which man does not know, and this satisfaction he seeks. No active person with any wisdom will deny the fact that often an effort he makes for happiness seems to result in disappointment. This shows that the effort was in the wrong direction. But apart from the making of an effort to find reality, one must first realize what this intoxication is. In order to do this, the first step on the path of truth is to know that such a thing as intoxication exists. There is the intoxication of childhood. Imagine what attention, what service, what care the child demands at that time when it still does not know who takes the trouble or who takes care of it. It plays with its toys, it plays with its playmates, it knows not what is awaiting it in the future. What it wants, what it plays with, is what is immediately around it. It does not see further. Nobody in his childhood has ever known the value of his mother or his father or of those who care for him until he reaches that stage when he begins to see for himself. And when we observe the condition of youth, that again is another intoxication. It is the time of blossoming, of the fullness of energy. The soul in that springtime never thinks that it can be anything else. The soul never thinks that this is a passing stage. The soul at that time is full of intoxication. It knows nothing apart from itself. How many errors a youth commits, how many faults he has, how many thoughtless, inconsiderate things he does of which he afterwards repents, but about which he never thinks at the time. It is not the fault of the soul, it is the intoxication of that time of life. The person who is intoxicated is not responsible for what he does, neither is the child to be blamed for not being responsible or appreciative enough, nor the youth for being blind in his energy. It is natural. The intoxication remains as a person goes on in life. There is only a change of wine. The wine of childhood is different from the wine of youth, and when the wine of youth is finished, some other wine is taken. Then, according to what walk of life a man follows, he drinks that wine which absorbs his life, either collecting wealth or acquiring power or seeking a position. All these are wines which intoxicate man. And if one goes even further in life, intoxication still pursues one. It may be one is interested in music or fond of poetry, or one may love art or delight in learning. It is all intoxication. If all these different occupations and interests are like different wines, what is there then in the world that can be called a state of soberness? It is wine indeed from beginning to end. Even those who are good and advanced, spiritual and moral, they also have a certain wine. One has to take wine all the way, but there are different wines. A highly advanced artist, a great poet, an inspired musician will admit that there are moments of intoxication which come to him through his art as a joy, as an upliftment, and it makes him exalted. It is as if he were not living in this world. Soberness is very difficult to find. The intoxicating effect of life is overwhelming and keeps man from a clear understanding. Therefore, however far advanced a person may be in the spiritual life, he can never be too sure that he will not become intoxicated, for he experiences intoxication in everything he does. That is why one cannot be too conscientious, ever. There are many who are confused, who do not know what they are doing, but a conscientious person does not hesitate. He is always wide awake, and he always knows whether he has done right or not. He does what he believes is right, and when that happens to turn out wrong, he will see to it that it is right next time. The higher intoxication cannot be compared with the lower intoxication of this world, but it is still intoxication. What is joy? What is fear? What is anger? What is passion? What is the feeling of attachment, and what is the feeling of detachment? All these have the effect of wine, all produce intoxication. Understanding this mystery, the Sufis have founded their culture upon the principle of intoxication. They call this intoxication hal, and hal means literally condition or state. There is a saying of the Sufis, man speaks and acts according to his condition. One cannot speak or act differently from the wine one has drunk. With the one who has drunk the wine of anger, whatever he says or does is irritating. With the one who has drunk the wine of detachment, in his thought, speech and action, you will find nothing but detachment. With the one who drinks the wine of attachment, you will find in his presence that all are drawn to him, and that he is drawn to all. Everything a person does and says is according to the wine that he has taken. That is why the Sufi says, heaven and hell are in the hand of man, if he only knew their mystery. To a Sufi the world is like a wine cellar, a store in which all sorts of wines are collected. He has only to choose what wine he will have, and what wine will bring him the delight which is the longing of his soul. I once had an experience in India which was my first impression, and a very deep impression indeed, of this aspect of life. When walking in a district where dervishes lived in solitude, I found 10 or 12 dervishes together, sitting under the shade of a tree in their ragged clothes, talking to one another. As I was curious to hear and see people of different thoughts and ideas, I stood there watching this assembly to see what was going on. These dervishes, sitting on the ground without a carpet, at first gave an impression of poverty and helplessness, sitting there in disappointment, probably entirely without possessions. But as they began to speak to each other, that impression did not remain, for when they addressed one another they said, "O King of Kings, O Emperor of Emperors." At first I was taken aback on hearing these words, but after giving some thought to it I asked myself, what is an emperor? What is a king? Is the real king an emperor within or without? For he who is the emperor of the outer empire depends on all that is without. The moment he is separated from that environment he is no longer an emperor. But these emperors, sitting on the bare ground, were real emperors. No one could take away their empire, for their empire, their kingdom, was not an illusion, their kingdom was a real kingdom. An emperor may have a bottle of wine in front of him, but these emperors had drunk that wine and had become real emperors. Do we not sometimes see in our everyday life a person who says, "I am ill, I am sorry for myself, I am miserable, I am wretched"? Put him in a palace and surround him with doctors and nurses, he will still be wretched. And another person who may be in great suffering and pain, but yet says, "No, I am well, I am happy, everything is all right," that person has a right attitude. Does it not show us that we become, the wine we drink? The man who is drunk with the wine of success knows no failure, and if circumstances make him fail 9 times, the 10th time he will succeed. The one who has drunk the wine of failure may be given all the possibility of success, but he has drunk the wine of failure, he cannot succeed. There is, however, a subtle feeling which every soul has, a feeling which cannot be explained in words, a feeling which makes a man more comfortable in his armchair at home than when perhaps 10,000 people stand before him paying him homage. A person may be loaded with wealth, but the moment when he sets aside all his pearls and jewels and sits down alone and takes a rest, that is the time when he breathes freely. And what does this teach us? It teaches us that man may have everything in the world which has the greatest value in his eyes, but there will yet remain something for him to seek. When he has that, then he is happy. One does not want to have a person, however beloved he may be, around one all the time. One sometimes wants to have a moment away from even the dearest person in the world. However proud a man is in his thought, and his thoughts may be great, deep, and good, yet the greatest joy is in the moment when he is not thinking. One may have the finest feelings of love, tenderness, and goodness, but there are moments when there are no feelings, and these moments are the most exalting. This shows that the whole of life is interesting because it is all intoxicating, but what is really desired by the soul is one thing only, and that is a glimpse of soberness. What is this glimpse of soberness, and how does one experience this glimpse of soberness, which is the continual longing of the soul? One experiences it by means of meditation, by means of concentration. But if it is a natural thing, why has one to make an effort for it? The reason is that one enjoys this intoxication so much that afterwards one becomes addicted to drink. And that is the condition of every soul in this world. Every soul becomes addicted to the wine of life. At the same time there comes a moment, if not in the early part of life, then later, if not when a person is happy, then when he is unhappy, when he begins to look for that soberness which is the continual longing of his soul. The Sufi culture therefore is a culture designed in order to experience that soberness. It is no doubt very difficult to explain how this soberness is attained. Yet after having explained the subject of intoxication, it is less difficult. For it is really as simple as saying that the way to give up drink is to keep the drink away and to remain without drink for a time. There are 3 principal wines, 3 principal intoxications. The intoxication of oneself, the intoxication of one's occupation, and the third intoxication, which is what the senses feel every moment, and these 3 wines cannot all be taken away at once. It would be just like taking away his life's sustenance from a person who lives on wine. But one can set a person a certain time and see that during that time he keeps sober and only takes 2 wines, not 3, and that he next tries to take only 1, not 2. And as a person advances in meditative life, he may arrive at that stage where the 3 wines on which he lives may all be withheld, and yet he still feels that he can live, and so he will become convinced that he can exist without these 3 intoxications. Verily, this conviction of existing independently of these 3 wines, which bring man the realization of external life, is the essence of the divine message and of all religions. The meaning of life. When one inquires deeply into life, one finds that what all souls seek is to know the meaning of life. The scientist looks and searches for it in the realm of science, and the artist finds it in his art. Whatever different interests people may have, their only real inclination is to find the meaning of life. This shows that it is the nature of the soul, and that the soul has come here for this purpose, that it may realize and understand the meaning of life. Thus, in either a material or a spiritual way, every soul is striving for what it longs for all the time, each in its own particular way. One can see this in the behavior of an infant. The desire of an infant to look at a thing, to tear it to pieces and see what is inside it, shows that it is the soul's desire to look into life, to understand life. No doubt the effect and the influence of life on earth are intoxicating. And through this intoxication man becomes so absorbed in himself and his own interests that he, so to speak, loses the way which is inborn in him. Not only in man, but even in the lower creation one finds the same attitude. In animals, in birds, the deepest desire is not looking for food or seeking for a comfortable nest. The deepest tendency is the wish to understand the nature of life. And this tendency culminates in man. A child will continually ask his parents, "What does this mean?" And this shows a continual longing to know the meaning of life, a longing which continues all through life. What does this teach us? It teaches us the principle that the source and goal of the universe are one and the same, and that the Creator created it all in order to know His own creation. But how does the Creator see and understand His creation? Not only in its highest and deepest aspect, but also through everything and every being. He is continually knowing and understanding His creation. For instance, if a person should ask, "What is art? Is it not made by man?" I would answer, yes, but made by God also, through man. And if that is so, then what is this whole mechanism of the universe doing? It is working. Working for what purpose? Working for the understanding of itself. And what is this mechanism of the world? Is it living or is it dead? All that we call living is living, and all that we call dead is living too. It is for our convenience that we say thing and being. In reality, there are no things. They are all beings. It is simply a gradual awakening from the witnessing aspect to the recognizing aspect. And no science, however material, will deny the truth of this. For the truth is to be realized from all things, from religion, from philosophy, from science, from art, from industry. The only difference is that one takes a shorter way and the other takes a longer way. One goes roundabout and the other takes a straight path. There is no difference in the destination, the only difference is in the journey. Whether one goes on foot or whether one drives, whether one is awake or whether one is asleep and is taken blindly to the destination, not knowing the beauties of the way. Destiny may be divided into two parts. One is the mechanism that activates the destiny, and the other part is the soul which realizes this. Therefore, the mechanism is the machine and the soul within it is the engineer who is there to work this mechanism and to produce by it what is to be produced. There are many methods and ways which man adopts in order to know and understand. And the mind is the vehicle, the tool, by the help of which he experiences life in the accomplishment of this purpose. In Sanskrit, the mind is called mana, from which the English word man is derived. And that means that man is his mind, not his body. According to the readiness of its tool, the soul experiences and knows life. It is the condition of the mind which enables the soul to see life clearly. The mind can be likened to water. When the water is troubled, there is no reflection to be seen. When the water is clear, then it shows the reflection. But in the pursuit of material gain, which is what he values most, man has become absorbed in that kind of life and has lost the benefit of life. As it is said in the Bible, where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. When, as at the present time, one defines civilization as commercial or industrial progress, that becomes the ideal of every soul. And it becomes difficult for a soul to retain tranquility in order to accomplish that purpose for which the soul was born. I do not mean by this that industrial or commercial development is not necessary for the life of man. Not at all, as long as it does not ruin or hinder the life's purpose for which man was born. Otherwise, in spite of all his progress, he will have wasted his life. He will not have attained the purpose for which he was born. There are superstitions in the East, and also in the West, that animals such as horses, dogs, cats, and birds give warning when a person is about to fall ill or die, and many have found that there is some truth in these superstitions. Why is it then that man does not understand and perceive life as the animals do? The answer is that the animals live a more natural life. They are nearer to nature than man, who is absorbed in his artificial life. So many of the things one thinks about and does and says are far from what is true, from what is natural. The more one can be at one with nature and at one with the deeper life, the more one realizes that what man does is to act continually against reality, not only when he does wrong or evil, but even when he is doing good. If the animals can know this, man is even more capable of knowing it. And it is this knowledge alone which is the satisfaction of his life, not all the external things. As it is said in the Bible, the spirit quickeneth, the flesh profiteth nothing. Where is man's wealth? It is in his knowledge. If his wealth is only in the bank and not in his knowledge, he does not really possess it. It is in the bank. All desirable and great things, values and titles, position and possession, where are they? Outside? No, because outside is only that which one knows by the knowledge one has within. Therefore, the real possession is not without but within. It is the self within, it is the heart which must be developed, the heart which must be in its natural rhythm and at its proper pitch. When it is tuned to its natural rhythm and pitch, then it can accomplish the purpose for which it is made. There are 5 different ways by which the knowledge of life is perceived. One way is known to many of us, though to woman perhaps more than to man, and that is impression. Very often we come into a house or we meet a person, and before we have spoken to that person, we get a kind of impression, either pleasant or unpleasant, a certain knowledge of that person's being. Sometimes at the sight of a person we feel like saying, "Keep away." Sometimes at the first glance we feel drawn to a person without knowing the reason. The mind does not know, but the soul does. It is not only that one gets an impression of a person one meets, but if one is sensitive to impressions, one can also feel the impression of a letter that comes to one from a stranger. Many say that they can tell someone's character by physiognomy or phrenology, but if they have not the sense of impression in their heart, even if they were to read 1,000 books on physiognomy or phrenology, they would never get the true impression. What does this show? It shows that true knowledge, from beginning to end, does not belong to the material realm. There is another way, and that is the intuitive way by which one knows before one does something, whether it will be a success or a failure. The more intuitive people feel this before doing or undertaking anything. But then there is a third way, and that is the dream or the vision. Some will say that dreams have a meaning, while others hold that there is no meaning in a dream. But in point of fact, there is nothing in this world which has no meaning. There is no situation, no action, no word that has not its meaning. All that is done with intention and all that is done without intention has a meaning behind it, if one can only understand it. The reason why one should see more clearly in a dream than when awake is that when a person is in a dream, his mind is naturally concentrated. For when man is in his waking state, all that is perceived through his senses calls his attention at every moment. No doubt the impression or intuition of a true dream is not manifested to every soul, and it is manifested to one soul more than to another. Neither does everyone live always in the rhythm in which he can receive impressions and intuitions. At different times his impression differs, and in accordance with his evolution, he is able to experience the knowledge of life. The more evolved he is spiritually, the more naturally he receives the knowledge of life from within. The fourth way in which one can receive the knowledge of life is by what may be called inspiration. It may come to an artist, to a musician, or to a poet. At the time when it comes, he can write or compose or do something that he will afterwards be surprised at, and he will wonder if he really did it himself, or if it was done by someone else. If it had not been for inspiration, that same poet might have striven for months on end, and not have been able to write the verse which he then wrote in a few minutes. What is the explanation of it? Is it by the development of his mind that a man receives inspiration? No, it is by the receiving quality of his mind, by the purity of his mind, his absorption in his art, the direction to which he has devoted his life. One might ask, what would be the best way for an artist to receive inspiration? By waiting, by praying, or by continuing to work till inspiration comes? He should do all three together. Wait for inspiration while working, and pray to God while waiting. Where have the great souls whose inspirational works have become immortal got them from? They have got them from inspiration. And how did they get this? They got it by forgetting themselves, by being absorbed in the object of their love. That is the meaning of sacrifice, sacrificing to the beauty of the ideal. One has to place the ideal before one. That is the way to get inspiration. Souls get inspiration from outer life or from another person. In all names and forms there is a source of inspiration, if one only knew how to tap it. In point of fact, whether inspiration is received from outside or from within, it all comes from God. The only difference is that when it comes from within, it is more direct. But the first step is to receive it from the outside. All those who begin to receive inspiration receive it first from outer life. Man is created in such a way that he first looks outward. And then, when he is disappointed, when he cannot find all he wants in the outer life, he turns within. He wants to see if he can find it in the inner life, and thus he becomes connected with the source of inspiration, which is the spirit of guidance. And he who has once found the spirit of guidance will always be able to find it again if he keeps close to it. But when he goes astray, when the way of his life takes another direction, then he wanders away from the spirit of guidance. And with still another step further there comes the realization which may be called revelation. When the soul is tuned to that state, then the eyes and the ears of the heart are open to see and hear the word that comes from all sides. In point of fact, every atom of this world, either in heaven or earth, speaks, and speaks aloud. It is the deaf ears of the heart and the closed eyes of the soul which prevent man from seeing and hearing it. There is a verse of a Hindustani poet which says, "O self, it is not the fault of the divine beloved that you do not see him, that you do not hear him. He is continually before you and he is continually speaking to you. If you do not hear it and if you do not see it, it is your own fault. It is for this purpose that every soul has been created, and it is in the fulfillment of this that man fulfills the object of God." When the spark that is to be found in every heart, the spark that may be called the divine spark in man, is blown upon and the flame arises, the whole life becomes illuminated, and man hears and sees and knows, and he understands. A Sufi poet says that every leaf of the tree becomes like a page of the sacred book, when the heart is open to read it, and when the soul has opened its eyes. The inner life. There is one aspect of life which is known to us, our everyday life in which we are conscious of all that we do, and this aspect may be called the outer life. There is another part of our life of which we are very often unconscious, and which may be called the inner life. To be without inner life is like being without an arm or a leg or an eye or an ear. But even that does not really illustrate the idea of the inner life. The reason is that the inner life is much greater and nobler and much more powerful than the outer life. Man gives great importance to the outer life, being absorbed in it from morning till evening, and not being conscious of the other aspect. Thus all that matters to man is what happens to him in his outer life, and the occupations of his outer life keep him so absorbed that he has hardly a moment to think of the inner life. The disadvantage of not being conscious of the inner life is incomparably greater than all the advantages that one can gain by being conscious of the outer life, for the inner life makes one richer, the outer life poorer. With all the riches and treasures that the earth can offer, man is poor. And very often the richer he seems, the poorer he is, for the greater the riches, the more limitation he finds in his life. The inner life makes one powerful, whereas the consciousness of the outer life makes one weak, because it is the consciousness of limitation. The consciousness of the inner life makes one powerful because it is the consciousness of perfection. The outer life keeps one confused. However intellectual or learned a person may be, his mind will never be clear, for his knowledge is based upon reasons which in turn are founded upon the outer things that are liable to change and destruction. That is why, however wise this person may seem to be, his wisdom has limitations. The inner life makes the mind clear, for it is that part of one's being which may be called divine, the essence of life, the pure intelligence. And wherever the light of pure intelligence is thrown, things become clear. Absorption in the outer life, without that which the inner life can give, makes one blind. All that one says, thinks, or does is based upon outer experiences. And one cannot realize to what extent the power gained by the inner life enables one to see through life. There is such a thing as belief in a third eye. In reality, the third eye is the inner eye, the eye that is opened by one's awakening to the inner life. Inner life may also be called spiritual life. One can see it in the forest, where it is the rain from above that makes the forest beautiful. This means that the forest alone does not have all that it needs, but that it needs something that comes from above. The light and the rain. It is the sun and the rain that make the forest complete. In the desert there is no rain, and therefore it is incomplete. There is the earth, but there is no water, nor is there water from above. The water that gives life to the forest is not to be found in the desert. The desert is unhappy, and the man in the desert is unhappy too, looking for shade from the hot sun. For the desert is longing, and the man in the desert is longing too for something he cannot find. Whereas in the deep forest there is joy. There is inspiration. The heart is lifted up because the forest is a picture of the inner life, not just the earth, not just the trees and plants, but because something which it needs has been sent down to it. And so it is with man. Man who is solely occupied with the things of the world is in the midst of the world, but he is in the desert. It is the inner life which produces in him, not artificial virtues and man-made qualities, but those virtues which can only arise from the inner life, and also the insight which makes the eyes see more than mortal eyes can see. The question is, how are we to be sure that there is an inner life? What proof is there? And the answer is that there is not one moment in our life when we do not see the proof of the inner life. Only, we do not look for it. All the different means of communication such as telegraphy and telephone and radio, all the new machines and inventions which make people marvel at what mankind has accomplished are, if man would only realize it, nothing but a poor imitation of what this human body is. Man is the center of joy, of happiness, of peace, of power, of life, and of light. Man is a phenomenon far greater than any other mechanism, if only he had the patience and perseverance to explore himself. But what we do is to explore others. We think it is very important to analyze things, and the analysis of human nature we call psychology. Man analyzes everyone except himself, and therefore true psychology is never reached. Because the real psychology is to analyze oneself first, and when oneself is analyzed, then one is able to analyze others. If man only knew that besides what he says or does or thinks, and the effects which are manifest to him, there is another kind of action which also creates things in a person's life, and which makes his world. And perhaps in a week or in a month, or perhaps in a year or 10 years, that which he has thus created one day comes before him as a world created by him. Such is the phenomenon of life. How insignificant a human being appears to be, just like a drop in the sea, yet what effects does he create by every thought, by every feeling, by every act? And what influence they spread, what influence they have on the lives of others. If one only realized this, one would find that the results of all one thinks, says, or does in the outer life are incomparably smaller than the results produced by what one thinks, says, or does in the inner life. Thus the consciousness of the inner life makes man more responsible than that of the outer life. The responsibilities of the outer life, compared with the responsibilities of the inner life, are much smaller. For the moment they might appear to be heavy burdens, but they are nothing compared with the responsibilities one has in one's inner life. If one sees what one creates, the responsibility becomes much greater. There is a saying in the East that the donkey seems to be much happier than the chaker, which is supposed to be the most intelligent bird. Man seems quite pleased in outer life because his responsibilities are less, his outlook small, his horizon narrow, and what he sees of the world is very little. But when the horizon is opened up, when the heart is penetrated through the barrier that divides the here and the hereafter, when he begins to see behind the veil and all that appears on the surface becomes a screen behind which something else is hidden, then he experiences life quite differently. The view of the one who stands on top of the mountain is quite different from the view of the one who stands at its foot. Both are human beings, both have the same eyes, but their horizons are different. Inner life, therefore, means the widening of the horizon and the change in direction of seeing. A mystic is often called a seer. And a great yogi has said, in order to see what is before you, you must first see within yourself. This means that within oneself there is a mirror, and it is that mirror which may be called the inner world, the inner life. It is in this mirror that all that is before one is reflected. When the eyes are looking outward, one turns one's back to the mirror, which is inside. But when the eyes are turned inward, then one sees reflected in this mirror all that is outside. By this process all seeing becomes so clear and manifests to such fullness that compared with it the outer vision is a blurred or confused vision. Two persons may live together for 25 years, for 40 or for 50 years, and may still not be able to understand one another because of the lack of inner life. Yet the inner life would enable them to understand one another in a moment. When it is said that the 12 apostles began to understand the language of all nations, did they learn the grammar of all nations at that moment? No, they learned the language of the heart. The language of the heart speaks more loudly than words can speak. If the ears of the heart were open to hear that language, outer words would not be necessary. Humanity, in spite of all its progress, is still most limited. And the more one sees the limits of this progress, the more one finds that it is because of the absence of inner life. When one reads in stories and histories of the past how many thieves and robbers and highwaymen there used to be, and how many murders were committed, one feels that it was a dreadful time. And yet when one thinks more deeply about it, one sees that the situation at present is much worse, and that the days of robbers and highwaymen were much milder. Then 1 or 2 persons in a village were murdered. Now towns and countries are swept away. War has swept away a large part of humanity. Imagine if another war comes, what will be the result? They say people have progressed, that they are more thoughtful, but with all this thoughtfulness, they seem only to have progressed in order to cause destruction and disasters to a much greater degree. Does it mean that humanity is not progressing? It is progressing, but in which direction? Downward. It is a condition of taking the path of the inner life that one should first be free. If the feet are pinned and the hands are nailed by beliefs, by preconceived ideas, by one's thoughts, then one stands still. One may have every desire to go on, but one is not going on, because one is holding on to something. When a person is holding on to certain beliefs, he is not going forward. And with many good qualities and high ideals, with religious tendencies, with a devotional temperament, with all the spiritual qualities that one may have, yet one can still remain standing in the same place. Either these ideas are holding the feet as if with nails, or the hands are somewhere holding on to the railing and not letting one go further. What the inner life requires first is freedom to proceed. The old meaning of freedom is very little understood, although everyone is seeking freedom. So much is said about freedom, but one can be free of everything except one thing, and that is the self, the last thing one thinks about. The conception of freedom is quite different at this time, And although seeking freedom, man is anything but free because he is caught in the trap of his own self. This is the greatest captivity there is. There he remains like the gin in the bottle. The inner life also requires sacrifice. Man considers that his learning, his qualifications, everything in his life, are there in order that he may gain everything he can in the world: power, possessions, wealth, anything, and believing that sacrifice is quite contrary to gain, he thus develops in himself a nature for gaining instead of sacrificing. Besides, sacrifice requires a large mind, it requires deep sympathies, great love. Sacrifice is the most difficult thing. Inner life is something which is within oneself. It has been called a chamber of divine light in one's heart. The door remains closed until an effort is made to open it, and that effort is sacrifice. The Bible speaks of self-denial, but this is often misinterpreted. Self-denial, according to general belief, means denying oneself all that is good and beautiful, all that is worth attaining. But in reality, self-denial does not mean denying oneself all that is good and beautiful, it means denying the self. And that is the last thing one wishes to deny. And the automatic action of this denial is to open the door to the inner life. The sages who have realized the inner life have realized it by contemplative means. Man from his infancy is unaware of that something in him which is more than a faculty. By experiencing life only through the outer sense, this faculty, which is the faculty of inner life, becomes closed through not being used, and this is just as if the door of a chamber of joy and light and life were closed. And as from infancy one has not experienced the joy and life and light of this chamber, which may be called a celestial chamber in the heart of man, one remains unaware of it. Nevertheless, one may sometimes have this feeling unconsciously. And sometimes when one is deeply touched, when one has suffered deeply, when life has shown its hideous side, or after an illness, or by the help of meditation, this feeling, which is unconsciously working as a longing to unfold itself, becomes manifest. In what way? In love of solitude, in sympathy for others, in a tendency towards sincerity, in the form of inspiration coming from all that is good and beautiful. It may manifest in the form of emotion, love, affection, in the form of inspiration, of a revelation, of a vision, or as art, poetry, or music. In whatever form one allows it to express itself, or with whatever one happens to be occupied, it begins to manifest in that form. Everything becomes spiritual once this door of the chamber of the heart is open. If a man is a musician, then his music is celestial. If he is a poet, then his poetry is spiritual. If he is an artist, then his art is a spiritual work. Whatever he may do in life, that divine spirit manifests. He need not be a religious person, he need not be a philosopher, he need not be a mystic. It is simply that what was hidden in him and thereby was keeping his life incomplete, begins to manifest to view, and that makes his life perfect. That enables a man to express life in its fullness. Every attempt made today to better the condition of humanity through politics, education, social reconstruction, and many other ways, all these, however excellently planned, can only be fulfilled if the something which was missing is added to them. But in the absence of this, all the efforts of many, many years will prove to be futile. For the something which is missing is the most essential of all. The world cannot remain a world without rainfall. The world cannot progress without a spiritual stimulus, a spiritual awakening. It need not be the first thing, It is natural that it should not be so. But it should at any rate be the last thing, and if it is not even the last, then it is most regrettable. How are the meditative souls awakened? How do they experience the inner life? In the first place, the adept values his object of attaining the inner life more than anything else in life. As long as he does not really value it, so long he remains unable to attain it. That is the first condition. That man should value the inner life more than anything else in the world, more than wealth, power, position, rank, or anything else. It does not mean that in this world he should not pursue the things he needs. It means he should value most something which is really worthwhile. The next thing is that when one begins to value something, one thinks it is worthwhile giving time to it. For in the modern world it is said that time is money, and money today means the most valuable thing. So if a person gives his precious time to what he considers most worthwhile, more so than anything else in the world, then that is certainly the next step towards the inner life. And the third thing is that the condition of his mind should be relieved of that pressure which is always in a person's heart, when he thinks that he has not done what he ought to have done towards his fellow men, be it father, mother, child, husband, wife, brother, friend, or whoever it is. If that pressure is troubling the mind, then that mind is not yet ready. A person may give his valuable time to contemplation, to a spiritual life, yet at the same time his mind is disturbed, his heart is not at rest, for he feels he has not done his duty, he has a debt to pay to someone. It is an essential point that the adept takes care that any debt to be paid in life does not remain unpaid. When we look at life, is it not a marketplace? The give and take is to be seen in everything, and if one does not pay now, the bill will be presented afterwards. And if one thinks that one has gained something without paying, in the end one will realize that one has to pay with added interest. Man does not know in what form he has to pay, nor in what form he does the taking. Very often he does not know when he takes or what he gives. But every moment of his life is occupied in give and take, and all the injustice of the world adjusts itself in the end. A clear understanding of this condition will show that it all balances. If there were no balance, the world would not exist. This ever-moving world, turning round and round, what holds it, what makes it stable? It is balance. And not only the world, but everything else too. The whole of life in its own way. Being occupied by our worldly life, we are not aware of that balance, but when the inner eye is open and one sees life clearly, one will find that there is a continual balancing process going on, and that we as particles of one mechanism are constantly busy keeping this balance. When once the heart is at rest through the feeling that one has paid, or is paying, one's debts, then one comes to a balanced condition in life. Then the heart, which is likened to the sea, is no longer restless as it is during the storm, but like calm, undisturbed water, and it is that condition which enables man to experience inner life more fully. Do we not often notice the disturbing presence of people who have not got that tranquility, that peace, that calmness? It is a terrible influence upon themselves and a disastrous influence upon others. One can realize this in one's everyday life. One may be sitting in an office with someone, one may be standing in a certain place, one may be staying in a house where other people are, and one can realize by their atmosphere whether they have reached a state of balance, tranquility, calm, and peace, or whether they are out of rhythm, unbalanced. This shows that what we call happiness and unhappiness is a question of a balanced or an unbalanced state. When a person's mind and heart are in the state in which they ought normally to be, he need not seek for happiness. He is happiness itself, he radiates happiness. When that state is disturbed, he is unhappy. It is not that unhappiness comes to him, but that he himself is unhappiness. The Hindu idea is that self means happiness, that the depth of the self is happiness. This means that all this outer structure, the physical body, the breath, the senses of perception, all of which help to make man, are most important, but his inner being can be called by only one name, and that is happiness. It is natural, therefore, that everyone should be seeking for happiness, though not knowing where to get it, and always seeking for it outside himself. And instead of finding the happiness which is his own, he tries to get the happiness of another. But what happens is that he can neither get happiness from another, nor can he give it. By trying to get it from another, he causes sorrow to that one, and the sorrow comes back to him. The robbers who go into other people's houses to steal are few in number, but there are many robbers of happiness, and they seldom know that they are robbing others of their happiness. The robber of happiness is more foolish than the robbers who go after wealth, for when they are successful, they at least get something. But the robber of happiness never gets anything. He only gives sorrow to others. Inner life, therefore, must not be considered, as many have thought it to be, a life which is spent in the forest or in a cave of the mountain or in retirement. Naturally, certain people need to seek solitude, those who prefer to be away from the turmoil of the world, whose inspiration is stimulated and who find themselves by being alone. But it is not a necessity for attaining happiness. One can be in the midst of the world and yet stand above the world. Life has many woes, and the only way to get rid of them is to stand above them all. And this can be attained by one thing, and one thing only, by the discovery of the inner life. And that's not all. Our experts and regular viewers respond to all comments. Also check if you forgot to subscribe and set your bell to receive notifications about new audiobooks and other useful self-development materials that we release regularly. Join in the discussions, don't forget to give likes and, if possible and inspired, support the development of the channel financially. All useful links will be in the description and the first attached comment. Goodness, love and wisdom to all. And now move on to watch the next part of the video at the links below, or choose something from the playlists of the channel and those you see on the screen.